When we first talked about doing a discussion on women of the Bible, I knew exactly which woman I wanted to talk about. And it wasn't because I understood her or her story. It was actually because I didn't understand either one. I didn't even like the story itself. And so when I started talking about girlfriends to try to figure out what their take on this story was, I couldn't find anyone that actually liked the story either. It's the story of a woman who comes to Jesus asking him to heal her daughter who is demon-possessed. But he responds to her in a way that to me seemed unkind. It actually seemed even harsh. And so this seemed a good opportunity to immerse myself into the story and try to figure it out for myself, because I knew I would walk away with one of two things. The first is that I would have a greater understanding of the person of Christ and actually maybe an appreciation for his linguistic genius, or I would have to admit that I couldn't understand this and there was something I couldn't reconcile, and that in this story it was not consistent with the rest of the story of Christ as I knew it from the scriptures. And yet his story is one of grace and redemption. And I would have to admit that there was something that I could not make sense of. So we are here actually in my favorite restaurant because it's a story that takes place at the dinner table. And so I love food, I love the table, and it's a story for some good girl talk, and so it seemed the best place to have this conversation. So to get us started, I'm just going to read the story to give us some context. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. The story has a good ending, but what I didn't like about it is that he referred to her as a dog. And no matter what the ending, that just didn't seem okay to me, and it seemed mean. There are three questions that emerge in this text to me. The first is, why did Jesus call her a dog? The second is, did Jesus really see her as inferior simply because she was a Gentile? And the third is, did he only come for the Jews, and does God play favorites? And that last one was really personal to me, because from the time I was really little, I can remember just this longing to be somebody's favorite. And I was talking to my sister about this not that long ago. From the time I was little, just like yearning, I just wanted one person that I knew I was their favorite in all the world. And now into my 30s, I still have that desire. And so if it's true that God played favorites, then this longing that I have cannot even be fulfilled by him. And that bothered me, and that was something that I just couldn't settle on. But when we look at this passage as a whole, this is really a passage about rejection. I think rejection for all of us, everybody has felt it at some point in time, and it leaves wounds that I think just take up space, take up home in human consciousness, and sometimes never fully go away. And I think you could argue that one of the greatest forms of rejection is when we reject someone for something that they are. The most significant example of that is someone's ethnicity, that when their ethnicity, what they are, actually becomes their liability as well. And I think that's just one of the greatest forms of oppression that you can do to someone else. Our ethnicity is a gift from God. We didn't choose it, we didn't even ask for it, but it's a gift that makes us distinct. And when you attack someone for what they are, I think you can do unspeakable damage. And this was a time when the Gentiles were very much in that position, where they were seen as unclean, they were seen as inferior, they were really struggling for a place in society. And that is exactly why Jesus has even gone to this place, because it is an area outside of Jewish territory. He's left Palestine. It's the only story where this takes place outside of Jewish territory. And he's left because Jews would never set foot there, because they didn't want to be near the Gentiles. And he's gone for some quiet, some peace and quiet, not even necessarily just for himself, but for some time with his disciples. This story takes place, or it's the beginning of the end, and he's beginning to prepare his disciples for what's about to happen, for the cross that he's going to have to bear, but for what is going to be required of them as well. And so they've gone to get away from the crowd to spend some time alone, and then this woman, this unclean, this Gentile woman, comes up and wants him to heal her daughter, and the disciples ask him to just send her away. And at first he seems to do that, but I think there's two things that we have to look at from Jesus' perspective. The first is that we don't have a tone of voice for him. The scripture and any recorded text can give us the words, the hard words, but they can't record a twinkle in the eye or a tone in your voice or your body language or anything like that. We don't know how it was that he actually said these things. And we have to, I think, consider that if what Jesus was saying was true, if he was saying that his message was only for the Jews and not for the Gentiles, that would be inconsistent with what we know ultimately happened. And we know Christ died on the cross for everyone. We know at the end of the story that he gives her what she wants. We know later that Paul actually tells us that there is no Jew or Gentile in Christ. So if that's what he meant, then he would have had to been changing his whole mission at the point of the story. So the question is, was Jesus stating a fact? Was he stating something that he was there to uphold, or was he actually stating what was a cultural norm, a cultural paradigm that he was in fact challenging at this point in time? And I think that's an interesting distinction that we have to make to understand where Jesus is going with all of this. The story is also really significant because it's where Jesus actually begins. We see the spread of the gospel to the entire world. What follows this story in the text of Matthew seems like it's not connected, or to me it seemed disconnected at first. But it's the story where Jesus is healing many. It says they brought the lame, the sick, the blind, the mute to him. Everyone was brought to his feet and they were healed. And the text ends actually with the phrase, and they glorified the God of Israel. And that stood out and was interesting. And I was trying to understand why it would have said the God of Israel in this point. Nowhere else in Matthew is he called the God of Israel. But I think with the Syrophoenician woman, we see the beginning where Jesus is beginning to heal indiscriminately, and the gospel is now going outside of the context of just the Jewish people and the Jewish culture. And so in this next story, it would have been Jew and Gentile alike that were there. The Jews only knew him as God. The only reason to specify that it was the God of Israel is if it was mixed company, and it was the Gentiles who were actually at that point being healed and recognizing the glory of the God of Israel. So this story is significant, and we know from his ministry, from all of this, that he was not there to exclude, that he was not there to push the Gentile out. So what then was he doing? Was he testing her? And then the second question is, was he only testing her? Because to me, when I first read it, I was going back and forth in my mind between what Jesus said and how she responded. But there's this group of people in between that are largely silent, and it's the disciples. We hear from them in the beginning when they say what? They tell him to send her away. She's bugging us. She's a nuisance. Tell her to go away. When Jesus said what he did, when he was speaking, I read a quote that I liked that said he was giving word to their theology. And they would have liked in the beginning that he sent her away. He threw in a little twist, though. He did refer to her as a dog, but he used the diminutive word for dog. And it was very common for Gentiles to be called that, but it was the stronger word. It was the word that meant scavenger. It was the word that meant the dogs who went through the trash. He threw in the gentle word that meant household pet, that meant essentially puppy dog. And you have to wonder, did the disciples stop and think? Like at first, maybe they're sitting comfortably. He's doing what they want him to do. He's sending her away. They use a term he uses a term that they're familiar with, but he gives it a twist. And at least it had to have raised a question, of uncertainty and confusion about why he would have done that. That wasn't the way it was normally done. It was usually given a much harsher connotation. So it's the disciples, I think, here that we have to look at what he's saying to them too. He gives them a second chance. She gives them a second chance because she comes back to Jesus again and she asks him again, to honor this request. And the disciples are still silent. Like, will they speak up for her? No. They had this opportunity, and I was reading a little bit about them in a commentary and saying that there were other days where they would do better. There were other days where they would succeed, but today was not one of them. If this was a test for the disciples, they failed. I think for all of us as a woman, I think we can put ourselves at times in the position of being the Syrophoenician woman where we are wanting this crumb from the Lord, but then if we're honest, we can also put ourselves in the times where we're on the other side of the table and we begrudge the crumb he's about to give to someone else. And that's where the disciples were. They were sitting comfy and happy on their side of the table and not wanting this other person to be turned away. And they did not stand up for her, but they had to have been a little bit uncomfortable. Were they trying to reconcile this message of love and grace that they'd known, now having to look at the face of this person? It is very, very easy to feel confident in your head knowledge and all the words when you don't have to look at a face. When you have to look at a face that is filled with angst and pain and hurt and longing, suddenly those words seem to fall very short. And that would be the place that they were in then. But still they were silent. They get a third chance because this woman will not give up, and she comes back to Jesus the third time with her request. The disciples are still silent, but it is this third time where we see something significant from her. Her approach to him in the beginning, and this is our third vantage point, is the woman herself. She comes to Jesus knowing that she has nothing. She doesn't feel like she deserves anything. There is no sense of entitlement. She realizes how small she is, but she also realizes that he has exactly what she needs. And to me, what is so significant is not just exactly what she needs, but she believes that he will give it to her, which tells me that she had a confidence in his character from the beginning, because it's one thing to believe someone can, and it is entirely a different thing to believe that they will. And that they might if you appeal to that sense in them. So she won't be turned away. She's got spunk. She's feisty. And I love that. She almost seems to be saying to him, like, no, you're not going to do this. Like, I know that there's more. I know that you're more. You're not going to convince me that you would just send me away. And I think that there is much to learn about her from that. What is also significant about her is when she first approaches him, she calls him the son of David. She was recognizing his position, his sort of political position and power, and his ability to do miracles on earth, but it was also his humanity. But through the conversation, and her last time she appeals to him, she calls him her Lord. And through this conversation, I think it's significant that Jesus took her from recognizing what he could do for her to who he was, to pulling that out of her. I think that Jesus' conversations with people are beautiful. There's very much a Middle Eastern cultural tone to all of them too. There's a mystery to them. There's a vagueness to them that I think in the West we aren't always comfortable with. We want everything spelled out and defined, but there's almost a poetry to the way he relates to people. And instead of just giving them an answer, he often calls them to own up to their own assumptions and to push past them and pushes them to the point where they reveal the truth, where they then speak the words and what he is actually trying to communicate. And he does that with her by continually pushing her away. She starts out with son of David, she ends with Lord. She starts with a request, she ends with a prayer to this Lord that she believes is going to give her what she asked for. She's essentially saying she won't be turned away by a crumb because she knows that a crumb from this man is actually an entire feast for her.
Coming to this country as a young woman, life was very difficult. On my way escaping from Vietnam, I fell between the two boats where on my way out, and the process of moving one boat to the next, I felt a hand wrapping on my hand, dangling between the boat. Threw me onto the others. Didn't realize that I was not dead. I know that God had me in His eyes. Others do look at me different. There's a lot of time I feel like I have to prove myself to do a lot more than others in order to get where I am. I went to a community college, and one professor told me that I was not a college material because I did not speak good English. I believe that God placed me for a purpose. That became my strength, inner strength. There are many other people give up because it's too hard. Yet somehow seeing me look at me and say, you know what? I've been there. I made it. And each time I go back to Vietnam, look at some of the boats, some similar to the boat that I left, always brought back to me that hand. And I'm looking forward to see that hand will lead me to. And I know there are many plans out there, which I don't know yet. It's like a puzzle. Things will fall into place. God will take me to the right people, the right event, things will happen.
As a woman, if I'm honest, I think I've always struggled to find my identity in the kingdom of God, and specifically in my place in ministry and even in the gospel story itself. And as I've tried to understand that further, I found that the answer to that question is really found in the person of Jesus himself, because it was through women at very significant points in his ministry that he brought real truth to life for all of us, whether it was the woman at the well, whether the woman with the alabaster jar, this Syrophoenician woman, or even the fact that he first appeared to a woman after his resurrection. I don't think Jesus did anything without intent or accidentally. Like, it all had a purpose and it all communicated a message. And that message to me is not one that means that we have anything to hold over anyone else, or that as women we feel any sense of entitlement, but actually I think just the pure fact that we can rest in him, just that realization that as the Son of David in his humanity, so here on earth, but also as the Lord himself in his divinity, he's affirmed our value, and that great answer to the question of identity for all of us as women is found in the person of Christ alone. I think the second lesson from the story that we would just not serve ourselves well if we missed is the lesson extended to the disciples, because that's one for all of us. For men and women alike, there are places in our lives where you come across someone else that has not met our standard of what is worthy or what is righteous. And we seem to want to hang on to everything for ourselves, and we want them to pay a price that we, in fact, don't think is ours to pay. And in those moments, will we try to secure our place at the table, at the place next to Christ, and shoo these other people away? Or will we learn to look through his eyes and actually welcome them to the table, realizing that we are there actually as only a guest of his grace and mercy too, and that there is enough bread to go around? The Syrophoenician woman got it, not just a specific answer to her request, but an answer to her identity itself, and that her faith had actually found its rightful place in the person of Christ. I think for all of us, one of the lessons we can get from the New Testament, all through the scriptures in the New Testament, Jesus is trying to teach the disciples to find beauty in unexpected places. The greatest testimonies of faith and love were not found in the prestigious places. It often wasn't even found in the elite group of the disciples, and it wasn't in the religious leaders. It was in the places of brokenness. It was in the places of just raw humanity, people who had been hurt, who'd been wounded, who were lost, and who had actually failed miserably. And this is where Christ finds those testimonies of love and faith in him. And it is these people that he lifts up and lifts them to look directly into his eyes. I think for me in my life, that's been an incredible source of encouragement to know that at my lowest moments, at my deepest failure, that he will still raise my chin to look up into his eyes. And I think the people that I've had the opportunity to meet in life, the ones that are in unexpected places and in dark places where some people miss because we're looking in all the bright spots. But it is those places of darkness where I found and felt that I'm actually in the presence of Christ himself. So I think for all of us, both in our brokenness and when we're looking upon it in another, there's this incredible assurance that it is there that we can find our identity and all of our answers, for they rest in him alone.